you control them, and how can you use business credit scores to be able to obtain much better terms on financing, get more approvals, and get higher approval amounts. Well, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we're going to be diving in and basically unlocking the secrets to your business credit scores. So by the end of this training, you're going to understand what your business credit scores are, who really offers the main scores, how they work, and most importantly, you're going to know the little insider details you need to know to control your scores, get really good scores, and then use those profiles, those business credit profiles and business credit scores to qualify for, well, really unlimited access to be able to get financing. So we got a lot to cover. Let's dive in. When we talk about business credit scores, like consumer credit reports and scores, there's a lot of places that offer them, right? There's places like PayNet, there's places like Credit Safe that we don't even think about. We don't even hear very often. And we forget about that. In the consumer and commercial reporting worlds, we don't remember that there are sometimes tens, hundreds, or even thousands of like regional or small reporting agencies that ultimately get gobbled up by the big ones. So for today's conversation, we're just talking about three main ones. There's three main business credit bureaus you need to know. Each offers about 5 scores. We're not going to go through all the 5 scores, but I'm going to tell you mainly what you need to know about the main scores. So the first, we look at Dun & Bradstreet. Then the second, we look at Experian. And the third, we look at Equifax. We're going to look at all of their main scores today. We're going to unlock them. We're going to talk about tips to be able to increase all of your scores. If you're just coming in, tell me where you're coming in from. I always like saying hello, and I'll give you a shout out on the stream, even mentioning your company's name right here as we're here. And Mike Senior says, hey, ready, willing, and able. I love it. Hey, JB, thanks for coming in. So for the sake of this conversation, keep it simple. We're going to look at 3 main reporting agencies: Dun & Bradstreet, Equifax, and Experian. Now, what's universal about all 3 of these is they all offer credit scores, about 5 main credit scores each bureau offers. You can get credit reports with all 5, or you can get credit reports with this their main score, which is what we typically see. And let's not forget, the credit reporting agency's job, their main job in this world, is to collect data about us, in this case, our businesses, and then sell that data to anybody that will buy it. So in the business credit world, we sell data to lenders, credit issuers. It's being sold to insurance companies, for example, and it's also being sold to other businesses for marketing purposes. We don't even think about that. So our data about our business, all these details that are on our business credit report, this data is gathered and sold to companies for the purpose of marketing. So they may want to market to a company that has $1 million in revenue, or want to market to a company that has $100,000 in profit, or want to market to a company that has 10 employees or more, or that has 0 days beyond terms in their payment history. So we don't want to ever forget that. Our business credit reports and scores are publicly accessible. Anybody that wants them can get them. If I go to Dun & Bradstreet's website right now, the first question they ask me when it comes to credit reports is, do I want my own or do I want somebody else's? So it's readily known that we can pull reports on anybody else, and anybody can pull our reports. But what a lot of people don't think about is that a lot of the data on our reports is used for other companies to be able to market to us. It's where we get our pre-screened offers for credit and financing. It's where they determine the insurance rates that we will actually pay on that. It's where suppliers decide if they want to do business with us, and we want to do business with suppliers. It's also used by a lot of prospects, clients, potential investors, people that want to buy our businesses as well. So this information is publicly available for anybody that wants to buy it. And that's what the bureaus do. That is what they do as a company. Fundamentally, they gather data, they sell the data. It's what they do. Consumer, commercial, it's one of the things that we want to jump into right at the beginning. And JB's in from Chicago. And then Yvonne's here from Queens, New York. Thanks for coming in. And JB's with Tech Luminate Academy. I teach people how to become web developers. I think that's awesome, man. Congratulations. If you're just coming in, give me a shout out. Tell me where you're coming in from. So business credit scores. Now that we know that, then let's talk a little bit more about the main scores. So first of all, each bureau offers a main score, and the main score they offer is what we typically look at and track. It's the main score lenders and credit issuers look at as well. And in this world of business, that main score really just looks at how we've paid historically in most cases. So what I mean by that is Dun & Bradstreet, the main score in the business credit scoring world is known as the PAYDEX score. It's 0 to 100, 100 being the best score you can get, 0 being the worst. Equifax Equifax is also their small business risk score goes from 0 to 100, with 100 being the best score we can get. In these two cases, Equifax and D&B, all their scores are is they look at how we've paid our bills that report to them from what we call trade vendors. So the bureaus will describe this as a trade vendor reports data to them, and then they calculate these scores based on our payment history. So for example here, and I'm going to actually see if I could pull something up while we're doing this, because I have a very in-depth look, the most in-depth look you've ever seen at scores like Dun & Bradstreet. And I want to be able to actually pull those up for you. So give me a second here. So that being said, so the main thing that they're looking for here is they're basically just looking at how we actually paid our bills. That's the first thing that the main score that they offer is. So D&B's Paydex score, Equifax's small business risk score, it's just a numerical value they give to how we on average pay our bills. It's not like some complicated algorithm that they're using to figure out a bunch of different stuff. It's not like that at all. What they're actually doing is they're just looking at how we've paid our bills. They average that out, and the average days that we pay our bills is what our score is. So business credit, for example, with Dun & Bradstreet's main score, the Paydex score, the average of that score, a good credit, is considered to be 80. And 80 literally means that we pay our bills as agreed. That's all it means. So if our bills, when we pay our bill averages out to paying them the day that they are due, then we would have an 80 score. Now, if our bills are being paid early, then we may have an 80, 85, 90, 95, or 100 score, depending on average of when we actually pay those bills. So literally, the credit scores just look at the average of when we pay our bills. So I'll take this to the screen. I'll show you exactly what I mean. So if we look at D&B's Paydex score, this is how the score actually works. If I have an 80 score, it by definition to D&B means my payment is prompt, my payment is on time. If I come in here and I pay it early, then if I pay it I get a 90, that means that they're expecting payment to come during the early discount period. If Staples says, hey, your bill's due on the 5th, but if you pay it on the 1st, you get a discount, then that's what that means. If we're always paying in that early discount period. And if you're really expecting the payment to come early, it's a 100 score. So all they do is they look at all of our payments and they figure out how early or late we pay them. And then whatever that average is what our score is, right? So if I have a 40 score, then on average, all my bills are getting paid basically 60 days late. That's how average they are. And that's what Equifax, and that's also what D&B's main scores do. Now, Experian's a little bit different. Experian's main score works pretty similar, actually, to a FICO score, and I'll pull this up for you. So Experian's Intelliscore is very similar to a FICO score, meaning that there's different aspects of the score that are calculated in. So if we look at Experian's main credit score, then we see that 5 to 10% of the score is payment behavior, right? How are we paying our bills? 50, 60% is of our current bills that are being paid. How are we paying those? 10 to 15% is credit utilization. 5 to 10% is our company profile, includes age of our business, our industry, our risk, size of the business by number of employees. That all calculates into 5 to 10. And then 10 to 15% is based on derogatory items, collections, liens, judgments, bankruptcies the business has. So Intelliscore, unlike Equifax, unlike D&B, it calculates these different things into the score. Now, here's what's interesting. It's the same thing. If you really look at Experian's Intelliscore, this is payment history. This is payment history. This is payment history. I'm actually going to bold that, but this is payment history. So if we add these up, then we see that 85% of Experian score, if we pay our bills on time and we don't have judgments and collections and that kind of stuff because we paid our bills on time, then we will have a good score. And these main scores are all the same in that right. D&B, Equifax, and Experian's main scores will be good if we just do one thing and one thing only, pay our bills on time. If we pay our bills on time or early, we will have good scores. It's one of the reasons that we love business credit. It's super simple to be able to get very good scores very quickly. All we need to do is get accounts that report to the business credit reporting agencies, and we pay them on time or early, and that one thing can give us good scores in as little as 30 days. This is a really big deal. In the consumer world, if you started a credit report today and you went and got 17 items that reported on your consumer credit reports, FICO wouldn't even give you a score until they had 6 months worth of data. So in the consumer world, they won't even give you a FICO score until you have 6 months worth of data. Most of us don't care about that or remember that we've been building credit for a long time. But in the business world, it can happen immediately. The minute they get that data, it populates. Within 30 days, we can have a credit report and score, and those scores can be good if we pay our bills on time or early. So this is the main thing that we want to know about business credit scoring, is since it ties into our ability to get loans and credit and insurance and be able to get good terms, we want to make sure that we pay those bills on time or early. That is one of the main factors that will control the scores and give us good scores. Now, beyond that, we look at other scores the bureaus offer. And the second most popular kind of score the bureaus offer is called a failure risk score. Every bureau calls it something a little different, but basically overall they're called failure risk scores. And what a failure risk score is just the likelihood that we will fail, that we will cease operations, we will shut our doors, we will file bankruptcy. The bureaus describe it wildly amongst those terms. But the bottom line is we're going to fail. That's what the score predicts. The likelihood that our business will shut its doors, will fail, will no longer be able to pay our bills because we're no longer in business. Now, the failure risk score is the second most important score that lenders and credit issuers look at. And this score starts to take into account more information other than just how we've paid our bills to accounts that report to the reporting agencies. So that being said, when we talk about our failure risk score, we look at things like the financial health of our business. Now, this is a surprising one because the financial health of our business is determined by one of two things. And the second, I think, is really going to shock you. The first is financial data the bureaus have about us. So, for example, I can submit my tax returns to Dun & Bradstreet. If my tax returns are good and they show profits, good revenue, I want to supply them to Dun & Bradstreet. Now D&B says I have strong financials, and because I have strong financials, they give me good scores. They give me lower risk. Now here's the scary part. If we don't give them financials, if they don't have that, then they look at the number of employees that we have to determine how basically the financial health of our business. So if I have 5 employees or less, according to the Secretary of State annual reports, I'm high risk. If I have like more and more and more employees, my risk is lower, lower, lower. So a couple things to keep in mind. If you have good financials, get them to the bureaus. If you don't have good financials, then you need to know they are going to look at the number of employees you have when you file your annual reports. And it's that time of year to file annual reports. And they're going to judge your financial health based on the number of employees you have. So that number of employees you have that you report to the Secretary of State is way more valuable than you think that it is because it calculates into these failure risk scores. And then again, they're also looking at public records into the failure risk score as well. And they're also looking at some other things, some basically what we call demographic or what they call firmographic information, which basically is like the industry that we're in, the NAICS code of our industry, things to that effect. Basically, basic details about our business in general. So if we want to have low financial risk scores, or I should say good financial risk scores, then what we want to do is we want to make sure that we get them financial data if it's good. We also want to make sure we're paying all of our bills as agreed. If our financial data is not good, then just keep in mind your scores very well can be lower just because you have a few number of employees. Okay, now that's the second score. Now I'll actually show you exactly what this looks like on real business credit reports because I want to show you how this ties in to your ability to be able to get money. So here, let me go to my screen again. I'm going to show you exactly what this actually looks like if we are talking about business credit scores. Then I want to actually show you some reports and scores. Okay, so that being said, now what we want to look at is we want to look at the other scores that are important to us as well, because even though they're not as important to these two scores, they are very important. So if we look at an Experian report, this box here is like the gold box. This box is what lenders and credit issuers mainly look at. And there's 3 components to this. They look at our Intelliscore. This reflects how we pay our bills, like we talked about. Then again, remember, there's a lot of factors that tie into this, but as we found, 85% of this score is just based on how we pay our bills. Here's that financial risk score, right? I told you, they call it all something different. In this case, it's a financial stability risk score. And this is the likelihood that we file bankruptcy that we mentioned. And the third is that it's a credit limit recommendation. And the more accounts we have on our business credit reports, the higher this amount goes. So this limit recommendation will go higher and higher and higher the more accounts that we have on our credit reports. So you can see here that this person has no credit. I'm going to zoom out a little. If we scrolled all the way to the bottom of this report, there's nothing here. It's an empty report. They have a failing score because they have no credit. The bureaus consider that to be high risk. Now we see this credit limit recommendation of $2,500 here. And what we see is we start to add accounts to the business credit reports. This only has one, that we start to see that credit limit recommendation go up. We also start to see that this person with even one account has a really good score. It only goes to 100. It's about as good as you can get. So we're seeing that, again, this is a direct average of how they basically pay. In this case, that one account they had, they spent less than $100 on and got an exceptional score. And you could even see that jump. You could see they went from a failing score because they had no credit to a good score because they had one account paid as agreed. So this is a nice thing about the bureaus, is all we have to do is pay our bills as agreed. And that's what actually is going to give us good scores. Now, that being said, that is the main two scores we need to know about, but there's other scores as well. So we also have something that's equivalent to like a rating, or something that's looking at our payment history, but actually taking into account financial data and other stuff as well. So the easiest way to explain it is like this. The credit bureaus have two kinds of scores. They have one that's called a performance score. A Dun & Bradstreet is a performance score. It's only based on how we've performed in the past. All they do is look at data that they already have, people that pay or people that we pay. People give us credit, we pay them. Those people report the credit to the bureaus. They're going to look at how we pay and give us a score. It's called a performance score. It's solely based on how we have performed. Then we have what are called predictive scores. Now, predictive scores pull in the same data as performance scores, like how we've paid. But they also use other factors to predict the likelihood that we may default as well. And they consider a default as us going 90 days late in the next 12 months. So like if they're going to look and say, okay, hey, look, here's the likelihood that we go 90 days late over the next 12 months. If it's high, then our scores are low because we're very high risk of defaulting. So again, we've got performance and we've got predictive scores. Now, performance score is D&B Paydex score. It's Intelliscore. It's D&B Equifax's small business risk score. Here's how you paid. Here's the score that reflects how you paid. Then we've got these performance scores. And performance scores are now taking into account financial data, the number of employees that we have, demographic information about our business, the industry that we're in, public record data. It brings the other stuff in and predicts the likelihood that we will default. So they all have these scores as well. Okay, and so these predictive scores take into account all this other information, collection data, the industry that we're in, all these factors to then predict the likelihood that we may fail. So a lot of times they'll get a D&B rating and a D&B Paydex score, and they'll just basically use both of those. One of them's like, this is how we actually did perform, and here's like taking into account other stuff and how we may perform in the future, and they'll determine those scores. So the bureaus also have that version as well. They also have what's called basically a supplier score. Each bureau has a supplier score. And a supplier score takes into account payment history, financial data. And then it also basically is very specific just for the sake of suppliers. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I'm a water company, and in order to sell water, I have to get these plastic bottles. So I get the plastic bottles from a supplier, right? And then I fill them with water and I sell them. But if I'm going to buy these bottles in bulk of 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 of these bottles, and I'm going to pay for that, I really want to make sure the supplier that I'm buying it from, like, isn't going to fail. Like that's we've all heard stories. A lot of people get caught in that trap, right? I give the supplier 50 grand, then the supplier goes belly up and I'm out my water bottles. So because of this, we need to make sure the supplier has good credit. Like we want to make sure they have good credit before we give them a bunch of money and hope that they're going to send the stuff we bought from them. So that's what supplier scores are for. D&B calls it the SIR rating, supplier evaluation rating, right? The SIR rating. They all have their own name for it, but the basic supplier score is just overall looking at what happens with suppliers. Can we trust suppliers? Should we give them large amounts of money up front in order to actually be able to feel comfortable that they're going to send the product that we may actually have, okay? And Demetrius says, hey, what's up, JB? Oh, you guys are talking to each other. I love that. So you guys are communicating. By the way, JB, Demetrius here just was chiming in. And if you don't mind, tell me where you're coming in from. I always like to say hello. So that gives you a little bit of a better idea of how the main scores work in the actual reporting agency, in the reporting world. Now, I'm going to fly through some stuff super quick with you. And the reason I want to do this is because there's a lot of other scores, but there's too much information to dive into in depth. So let me kind of go over the main stuff that I think you're going to want to know. So now if we look at this, we've already come in and we've already looked at D&B's Paydex score. We know how that works. We've talked about this failure risk score as well. I'm not going to give you all of the scores because I want to show you how complicated they all are. So if we look at a failure risk score here, we see that there's a score and then we see there's a risk indicator. And this is what it looks like. We've got a score itself. Then we've got like a minimum risk if we're a 1, a high risk if we're a 4, right? And again, this is all of us failing in the next 12 months is what they're trying to basically predict. So you don't ever want to try to memorize all of this stuff because these scores are very complicated. A lot of them, like D&B's risk score, has classes, a risk class, and then they also have the actual score. So some things that you may see on your actual credit reports when you look at them, right? And so how is this calculated? This is exactly from D&B. Okay, it aggregates company information from a variety of sources, public records, financial statements. Remember, we talked about that, past payment experiences. So again, now we're seeing from D&B, hey, we look at public records. We look at those financial statements or number of employees you have. We look at your past payment history. Then we have the demographic information about your industry, including your industry NAICS code, right? And so now we're looking at this company type, age of business, public records, net worth, according to your financial data, the trade data that's reported to them. And again, this is just a visual representation from D&B themselves to validate everything I just walked you through. Now, here we come. Here we go. We see the Supplier Stability Index, also known as the SIR rating, right? And now we see that we've got this SIR rating here. And the SIR rating is that supplier's risk rating that we looked about. Then we have what's called that delinquency predictor. Remember I told you, hey, there's another score like Paydex that uses other financial data included to predict the likelihood that you may default. And that's what's called the predictor score. So whenever we see this DPS score in our reports, that's what it is. It's similar to a Paydex, but what we're doing is we're pulling in all of this other data as well. And again, we see a score, then we see the risk class, just like we did see with the actual failure score. Then we see a percentile. What's the likelihood that we will default? So, for example, if my delinquency risk score is very high, okay, then that's a good sign. Then I'm like in the top 90 to 100%, 1.1% chance of defaulting. That's not bad. But if I'm at the lowest end of the spectrum, I have a 53% chance of defaulting. That means more than 50% likelihood that my business is going to fail. So that really looks at the main. And then we've got the D&B rating. And the D&B rating, again, pulls into account public records, payment data, financial data to give us a risk rating as well. Now, I'm not going to get into all of this, but again, this has to do with multiple components like we just saw. And this also basically has to do with multiple different classes and scores. So it's very confusing if you try to dive into it. Just want to give you an overview of what these scores do. Now, they also have a cyber risk rating, but again, this is really the likelihood that you're going to fall victim of cyber risk. This is the newest rating that D&B has. Now, we already talked about in Intelliscore. We actually talked about how this score works. We looked at that and broke that down. Okay, and we also have this financial stability risk score, right? Same thing. I told you Experian has one of these. And Experian saying, hey, here's exactly what we're taking into account. Here, this score identifies your risk of being severely delinquent. We're taking into account things like high utilization, tax liens, judgments, collections, high-risk NAICS codes, low time in business. These are the kind of things that we're using to calculate that. And again, we've got the score, and we've got the risk class assigned. Not things you want to memorize. You need to know the main scores, but I just want to show you how all of this works because you can see how complicated this is. If we look at the work directly from the bureaus, we can see exactly from them the risk category that we're in. And we can look at the risk of default just based on the actual scoring category they're actually giving us. Okay, now Experian's unique because we have blended scores that blend consumer and commercial credit reports together and give them both. But I'm not going to talk about this a lot because the reality is we don't see this used very often. Blended scores are just not used very often in the business world. And the reason for that is because they can get our business credit reports without our permission, but they cannot get our consumer credit reports without our permission. They have to. The law requires they get our permission for consumer reports, but not for business. So if they wanted to pull an Experian blended score, then what would happen is they'd have to look at our personal score and get our permission. They don't want to do that, so we don't see that very often. We talked about the credit risk score. Equifax works exactly the same as DNB's Paydex score. Okay, we also see here that we've got that supplier score from Equifax as well. And then we also see beyond that we've got another predictive score for suppliers. And we also see that we've got the bankruptcy score as well, or the failure risk score that says the likelihood that our business will actually fail. So that being said, what else do you need to know? Well, if we look at how all of this works, there's a couple things that we want to do. The first thing is just pay our bills on time. The key is to get as many accounts that report to the reporting agencies as we can possibly get and pay them on time or as early as we can. So as soon as an item ships that I have paid for, as soon as I can, I want to pay that bill. And what I mean by that, as soon as I can, is that Quill, for example, and Quill isn't even reporting right now, just so you know. Quill's not even reporting to DNB. That's information last week. It changes all the time. But so let's say Quill was reporting. Well, then again, with Quill, what we want to look at here is ultimately how often they report, but we also want to look at when they'll let us pay. If Quill ships my items right now, I can go on tomorrow and pay that bill without problem. But if Staples ships my items right now, Staples will not let me pay the bill until until the payment cycle comes due. So everybody's different on when they let us pay, but we want to pay on time or as early as we can. That's going to give us good scores. Second, if we understand that we have good financial data, like tax returns that show a profit, submit those to the bureaus. If you submit it to the bureaus, it's going to help multiple of your scores that the bureaus offer. If we don't have good financials, then we really want to consider the number of employees that we have when we file annual reports, because less than 5 is really going to damage multiple of our scores if they don't have financial data. It's just something we need to keep in mind. Okay, the other thing is we have to keep our public records clear. No judgments, no bankruptcies, any of that stuff on the business we want to make sure doesn't happen. And if it does, the public record data is coming from LexisNexis. So we want to get our LexisNexis credit report, and then we want to clean up anything on there that needs to be cleaned up that's inaccurate. Maybe there's some details of the bankruptcy that's inaccurate that should be disputed. But by disputing it in LexisNexis world, then disputing it with the bureaus, then that item, those negative items from public records can get deleted. A lot of people don't know that the bureaus get public record data. By the way, consumer and commercial reporting agencies, they get their data from LexisNexis. It's where it comes from. So if you clean up the data on LexisNexis, that's going to help you then go to the bureaus and clean up the data there. Now, Travel Giant says, hey, what's your thoughts about aged shelf corps? One site offers a public offer for 400 USD, signs the annual report. So, and I'm going to pull this question up here because I think it's a little off topic, but I think it's a fantastic question. So the answer is that shelf corporations are completely bogus and an absolute waste of your time. And here's why. Shelf corporations used to have a legitimate purpose. Before we had the internet and we could file stuff online, we could get a shelf corporation and have an entity set up. Back in the day, it took us months to set up an entity. We had to mail the stuff in. The Secretary of State had to get the mail. They had to file it. It took us 2-3 months to set up an entity. So if I'm trying to bid on a government contract and then this can help me, I need an entity to do it. I go buy a shelf corp. Now I've got an entity and I'm good to go without waiting months to get it. Go to Secretary of State and immediately set up our entity. Shelf corporations have no more purpose. Now, the people that sell them will lead you to believe that having an aged company will help you. But what they won't tell you is what truthfully happens. And here's what truthfully happens. What truthfully happens is that when you buy a shelf corporation, ownership changes from whoever owned it before to now you're the new owner. The minute that happens, the bureaus re-age the credit report, and they show right on the credit report that the company changed ownership on this date. And they alert lenders and credit issuers as well. There's like a red flag attached to the credit report that says, hey, ownership changed on April 2023 to a new entity. Now, all of a sudden, when lenders and credit issuers look at that, they treat it like a new business. They'll actually look at the bank statements to age the company, no longer the actual date the entity was established. And that's the problem we have here. So if we look at this question, the problem is maybe they will give you the annual report, but they're not going to give you aged bank statements. And that's the problem, is that this isn't going to help you to buy an aged corporation, because if you buy an aged corporation, you're going to be re-aged to the date that you took ownership of it. Then the problem is if the bank statements don't come with it, which they never do, then you don't have the age of that. There's a lot of other problems as well. You are now liable for everything that took place in that business before you got there, right? So if that business took a $500,000 loan and defaulted, and you don't know that, and you think you're buying a shelf corp for $400, well, they just sold you the liability of that $500,000 loan that defaulted. Not to mention, maybe there's back due taxes to the IRS. There's all kinds of problems that the minute you take ownership of an entity, you are now responsible for. This is exactly why aged corporations are so dangerous. So back to our main tips with business credit reports. Pay our bills on time or early. Get financials to the reporting agency if the financials are good. If not, watch our number of employees, because they're going to judge our financial health based on the number of employees. The third thing that we want to do is we want to clean up any public records, as I talked about. It all comes from LexisNexis. So any judgments, any bankruptcies, any tax liens, we want to go to LexisNexis to clear it up and clear it up off the bureaus as well. The other thing to keep in mind is lawsuits are part of your public records on a business report. If you are sued, if you are suing somebody, then that will be there as well. So some things to keep in mind when you're trying to decide how to move forward with certain things that could into litigation, that could actually be a deterrent. It can actually be a problem, as it shows on your business credit reports. So some things to keep in mind there as well. Other thing to keep in mind is what the bureaus call weighted averages. So several scores like D&B's Paydex score is based on what's called a weighted average. So they weigh your higher limit accounts higher into the score than lower limit accounts. So if I have a $10,000 credit card and a $20,000 credit card, and if I was ever going to pay late, I'd always want to pay the $10,000 credit card late first, because the higher limit calculates more weight into my score. So the highest limit accounts we have are the most valuable ones we want to make sure we pay first, because those are the ones that have more weight into the overall score calculations than the actual lower limit accounts do. Okay, and the other thing is we want to get as many accounts reporting to the reporting agencies as possible, and then again, pay the accounts on time or early. If we've done all of these things, that's what's really going to equate to us having good business credit scores. It doesn't matter which of the 5 scores the bureaus offer that you look at. If you've done those things, you're going to have good scores with all 5 just because you did those things. But if you say, Ty, that's way too much information, then let me leave you with one point. Pay your bills on time or early. We are so blessed to have business credit scores that basically look at just how we pay our bills. If there's one thing and one thing only we do, then let's pay our bills on time or early. If we do that one thing, that's really the best thing to help get us the best business credit scores. And that is the key to us getting higher approvals, more approvals, and getting better interest rates, better terms. Because those credit scores are directly related to the interest rates you pay. So if you want more money and you want lower interest rates and you want lower payments, you need to have good business credit scores. It directly correlates to the actual interest rates that you'll pay. I owned a mortgage company for a long time, and I can tell you, your consumer credit score determines your mortgage rate. Like, we have a matrix that we look at that says, hey, today's rates, you're at 6 1/4 if your score is 700. You're at 6 1/8 if your score is 710. You're at 6 6% if your score is 720. Your score directly calculates into what your rate is. It's the same thing in the business world. If you want good scores, if you want good rates, you have to have good scores. If you're not getting the rates you want to get on financing, you need to address your business credit. Build it deeper, more accounts on there, and get good scores. It's really the key to success. So a few links as we go. First of all, you can go to creditsuite.com/monitoring and get in on the cheapest monitoring you're ever going to get for a very short window of time. We get reports wholesale from NAV, and then we don't really mark them up. So as a result of that, you get very cheap reports. NAV is raising their prices across the board to like $50. So again, we're affected. Everybody that's affected that gets credit reports. So you have a really small window to get in and get reports before it's gone. So again, they're about to raise prices. If you want to get in on credit monitoring, you can go to creditsuite.com/monitoring to actually be able to do so. Let me see if I've got like a QR code or something I can do to show you that. The other thing that you want to do is if you want to build your business credit, then I'm going to go ahead and throw up a free resource for you to do so right here. This is a business credit building guide. And again, this has about an 89-page document that gives you everything you need to know about financing and business credit. If you just scan that, that's going to give you a lot more tips. That's going to help you successfully build business credit for your EIN without using your social, and the things you need to know to make sure that you get good reports and scores. The other thing to keep in mind is make sure you get with us for a free finance assessment. On this finance assessment, we will actually walk through all of your business with you, your fundability, your business credit, your financing, and we can actually give you some feedback on the things that you want to do to make your business basically more fundable. The things you need to, we'll give you tips to build your business credit. We'll tell you all the kind of financing that you can qualify. And all you have to do is give us a call for that free finance assessment. I throw our number up on the screen right here. If you do so, then we'll be able to help you understand exactly what you need to improve on your fundability, give you tips to build business credit, and help you with understanding all the financing you can get right now as well. So hopefully you now know the secrets of your credit scores, right? We were able to unlock that and give you a lot of tips along the way of what you want to do to make sure that you improve your scores. Make sure you give us a call for your free finance assessment. Make sure you scan here for our comprehensive business credit building and finance guide, and that will get you all the tips and resources you need to have good business credit scores, which is really the foundation of you getting maximum funding at the best rates and terms. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to seeing you next time. We talk about more cool ways to get the money you need to start